I'm the big boss now. Take your 2 weeks and go quietly. That's what the CEO's nephew said to me in front of the entire acquisition committee like he was announcing the winner of a Chili's trivia night. Travis, 28, all jawline and zero substance, leaned back in the leather chair like he just solved capitalism. The buyer's executives stared at him the way you stare at a raccoon trying to drive a golf cart. One of them, a guy with a Rolex and a twitchy pen, scribbled something into his folder. Another discreetly tapped their phone camera recording. I didn't speak, I just smiled. The kind of smile that comes after months of watching a slow-motion car crash that everyone else insists is a parade. Travis thought he just pulled off his power move. Thought he'd finally handled the woman who'd spent the last 8 years building the operational backbone of Core Sentry from scratch. Had no idea that the 2 weeks he just offered me were the last ones he was ever going to spend in a meeting room. Hell, if he was lucky, they'd even let him keep a badge long enough to use the bathroom indoors. Here's a fun little pause in the middle of the mess. If you're the type who listens to these stories while rage jogging around your HOA or washing sadness off your dishes at 11 p.m. and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. Helps the team keep the lights on and makes it easier to drop more stories like this right into your life when you least expect them. Also, clicking like tells the algorithm Carol isn't the only one who likes her revenge with a side of cold professionalism. Anyway, Travis, to him, this was a grand finale. He'd strutted into the room in a tight blazer and too much cologne, flanked by a junior HR rep and his strategic transformation consultant, which is just corporate for frat buddy, who bought a LinkedIn premium trial. His PowerPoint was already open on the screen behind him, stuck on a title slide that said Core Sentry 2.0 Streamlined Synergized Savage. I wish I were joking. The buyers, 4 of them from a private equity firm called Nordell Systems, were all seated like poker players with full hands and empty expressions. They had flown in from Chicago. These were not casual executives. These were the kind of people who could spot operational decay faster than mold in a walk-in fridge. And Travis was wrought with a tie. Carol's been a huge part of our legacy team, he said. Doing that thing where men pretend they're honoring a woman, while simultaneously backing over her career in reverse, but we're moving in a new direction. Lean, agile, aggressive. She'll be stepping down after a brief transition period. 2 weeks should be plenty. He didn't even glance at me. Just kept his little show going like I was already boxed up and gone. What Travis didn't know, and what made the buyer's side-eye glances so damn delicious, was that he just handed a loaded weapon to someone who already knew how to shoot. I'd spent the last 2 months working quietly with Nordell's due diligence team. Not because I begged for relevance, not because I wanted revenge, but because the retiring CEO left without warning and Travis waltzed in with a badge and a branding deck. Someone had to make sure the damn company didn't implode before the ink dried. So I answered questions. I cleaned up behind Travis's tantrums. I rescheduled vendor audits he didn't know he canned. And when Nordell's VP of integration asked me to flag any structural red flags, I didn't snitch. I just forwarded the right emails, attached the right documents, highlighted the right names. I kept things quiet. But Travis didn't. He copied buyers on memos where he openly took credit for 6-month plans I built. He removed me from leadership briefings and bragged about it. And now here he was, saying my farewell, like he was kicking an intern out of a karaoke bar. I looked across the table at Nordell's CEO. He hadn't blinked once. His hands were folded neatly on the binder in front of him. There was a yellow sticky note peeking out from the edge of page 14. That sticky note, it was my fuse, and Travis had just lit the match. The day the old CEO left, nobody in the building even knew who was in charge until Travis showed up wearing a badge he printed himself and holding a mug that said "World's Okayest Leader." He strolled in late, called an all-hands meeting, and opened with, "We're going to disrupt some silos." People was the exact moment I knew we were in deep manure. There was no transition binder, no handover, no passwords list, no vendor renewal calendar, no compliance roadmap, no understanding of how payroll systems integrate with union schedules. Just a bunch of stale donuts in the break room and a Slack message from HR saying, Travis will be assuming executive oversight until further notice. Notice never came, but the chaos sure did. Within a week, 3 key department heads started calling me directly with fire drills. Legal was trying to finalize 3 pending contracts without signature authority. It was locked out of a systems dashboard. Travis claimed he had master access to, but it turned out he thought master access was just a vibes thing. Finance. They couldn't even get approval on Q3 disbursements because Travis kept replying circle back in every thread like it was a spell that had summoned results. Me, I kept things alive. Vendor negotiations, department budgets, compliance reports. I wrote half of OP's continuity playbook myself on my own time, because if I didn't, the entire acquisition would detonate an AFOG of unpaid invoices and expired NDAs. I was tired, not just physically, mentally, emotionally, cosmically. Like the universe had been whispering, "You're not done yet." And I was whispering back, "Then send a damn intern or something." But I couldn't let the ship sink. I'd built too much of it with my own two hands. That warehouse logistics system, mine. That vendor scorecard matrix, mine. The contingency plan for hurricane season that got us a risk rating boost. Also me, I taken chaos and turned it into a $600 million acquisition target, and they handed the final lap to a guy who thought COO stood for champ of operations only. So when the buyers reached out, not formally, not even through channels, just a message from someone in ops strategy named Mir asking, "Do you have any kind of continuity framework you'd recommend?" I didn't even hesitate. I didn't give them a report. I gave them stability. One file, password protected, structured, bullet pointed, dated, and documented. No spin, no politics, just real bones of the machine they were about to purchase. I wasn't trying to save myself. Had already emotionally packed my bags, but I wasn't going to let the company I bled for get gutted by a guy who once asked if P&L was a drugstore brand. Maya responded an hour later with, "This is gold. Can I copy Travis in?" I replied, "Better not yet." That was the turning point. Suddenly, E was copied on emails I was never supposed to see. Internal risk threads, integration scheduling, HR forecasting tied to change of control clauses. First, it was subtle. My name CC'd along with 6 others. But then a week later, Maya sent a direct request. "Carol, can you confirm the timeline you'd recommend for vendor onboarding under Scenario B?" I stared at that line for a long time. It didn't say, "Can you ask Travis?" It said Carol. And then one morning, I opened my inbox to find a legal doc attached from Nordell's Transition Council. No message. A file titled Chorus Entry Transition Staffing Draft for Internal Review. I opened it expecting the usual vague placeholders, empty roadscriptions, legally mush. But then I saw something weird. The continuity lead line blank like a seat waiting to be filled. I flagged it and dragged the email into a folder I called Just In Case. Because sometimes corporate wars aren't won in boardrooms. They're won in footnotes, in CCs, drafts that no one notices until it's too damn late. The first thing Travis did after ordering a company-wide rebrand with fonts he found on TikTok was pull me from all cross-F functional calls. "Ops shouldn't be in the room for strategy," he said with the confidence of someone who once failed intro to microeconomics twice. I didn't fight it. I just sipped my lukewarm coffee, nodded like I was too old to care. Quietly marked every cancellation mail with a red tag. Next, he brought in his old frat buddy Bryce, a man with the charisma of expired lunch meat and the job title Director of Strategic Transformation. No one knew what that meant, including Bryce, but he did arrive with a standing desk, a gimbal camera for zooms, and a whiteboard full of words like disruptive, scalable, and synerg. Within days, things started to fall apart. Our vendor payment queue stalled because Bryce optimized the invoicing workflow by removing 2 approval steps that existed for legal compliance reasons. One supplier even drove to HQ personally and threatened to repossess leased equipment. I found Travis in the break room laughing with Bryce over protein bars and tried to explain the gravity of the situation. He cut me off mid-sentence. "Carol, maybe if you focused less on being alarmist and more on being adaptive, this wouldn't be a problem. You're just ops. Let strategy handle the big stuff. Just ops. Never mind that I was the one who set up the contract renewal pipeline that kept our software licenses from lapsing mid-quarter. Never mind that I'd already personally handled 5 emergency escalations in the last 3 days that Bryce hadn't even noticed. Never mind that we were circling the toilet and Travis thought the flushing sound was applause. I stopped speaking in meetings mostly because I wasn't in them anymore. I stopped offering ideas. I stopped fixing messes before they bloomed into crisis. I just watched, documented, noted the gaps, quietly mapped out what would happen step by step when the whole thing buckled under its own ego. And buckle it did. 3-year logistics partnership fell through when Bryce missed a deadline for confirming renewal. The buyer's legal team flagged it. I got a panicked ping from our finance lead asking if I had any backup vendor scoped. I did, of course I did. I'd built a failover list in Q1, knowing damn well we'd need it by Q3 if the clown show kept rolling. I handed it off quietly without CCing Travis, without saying a word. But the buyers noticed. That's when I got the message. It came late at night from Maya, the VP of integration over at Nordell. Just 6 words. You okay? Just checking on you. And I cracked, not emotionally, not with tears, but with calculation. Because if Maya was reaching out directly, that meant my silence was getting louder than Travis's noise. And that meant I still had leverage. I replied with one line. No fluff, no drama. Yes, but you might want to request page 14, paragraph 3E in the staffing agreement. I didn't explain what it said. I didn't need to because paragraph 3E was the part no one read. The part Travis had signed off on without even glancing. The part that named the continuity lead as having sole veto power over any staffing transition that could impact operational integrity. And that line was still blank, not for long. The first briefing happened by accident. Or at least that's what I told myself when I stayed on the Zoom call 2 minutes longer than necessary and answered a question that wasn't meant for me. We were supposed to be reviewing asset inventories, but Travis had delegate fatigue his words, so he forwarded the invite to me without reading the agenda. One of Nordell's transition leads, Alan, maybe mid-40s, pinstripe brain, calm voice, asked, "We have clean vendor onboarding metrics going back 3 fiscal years." Travis stared like someone had asked him to recite the quadratic formula in Portuguese. I waited half a beat, then said yes. You'll find them in the second tab of the ops metrics doc shared last Thursday. Line 42 onward includes late cycle recovery factors. Silence. Then Alan said, "Thanks. That's helpful." After the call, I got a message. Not from Travis, even from our exec team, from Nordell's integration office. Would you be open to a short side channel meeting regarding continuity risks? I stared at the screen, weighing the risks. I wasn't a whistleblower. I wasn't about to break NDAs and burn bridges just to play office hero. But I wasn't going to sit and watch my company crumble under the weight of man-child ambition either. So I agreed quietly, carefully. 1 call, 15 minutes off calendar. Informal alignment, they called it. That first briefing turned into 3 more by the end of the week. I didn't speculate. I didn't editorialize. I didn't badmouth Travis or Bryce or their unholy startup cosplay. I just answered what was asked. Do we have a post-close risk matrix? Yes. Built it in Q2. Sent any exposure from the shift to that new compliance software? Yes. Here's the audit trail. Page 3, line 17. Indication internal leadership isn't aligned on Q4 deliverables. I attached 2 conflicting strategy docs. One from finance, one from Travis's Slack-fueled fever dream. I never said I told you so. Didn't have to. By the 3rd call, the tone had shifted. Alan was joined by Maya, then a 3rd exec, then their legal advisor. They stopped calling it a chat. It became a review. And then Mir asked, if there were an ideal role for you post-close, maintain continuity and minimize operational risk, what would it be? I didn't hesitate. Interim co-transition Americas. Not permanent, not glamorous, just accurate. I didn't want a throne. I wanted control over the bridge until we were out of the storm. Maya nodded, typing something I couldn't see. 2 days later, a Norda lawyer sent me a document labeled Transition Staffing Notes Internal Only. It wasn't formal. Not yet, but I read the page twice, then a 3rd time. My name was there. It had a box next to it. Checked. Meanwhile, Travis was busy sending out emails about a company-wide synergy rebrand, hosting brainstorming sessions with beanbag chairs and kombucha, and asking the finance team why cash flow didn't just mean more sales. He had no clue. Not about the calls, not about the title, not about the clause he'd authorized in the staffing agreement because reading contracts isn't visionary leadership. He thought the acquisition was his moment. I knew it was the battlefield, and I was already winning quietly, professionally. One unanswered question at a time. It started with a Slack post from Travis at 11:04 a.m. Rocket big win. We've migrated compliance workflows to a leaner SOSAC. Faster, cheaper, smarter. Let's disrupt legacy. Read it 3 times, mostly to confirm that yes. He'd actually written Disrupt Legacy about a compliance platform that handled legal documents, audit logs, and regulatory reports for $600 million acquisition. My inbox exploded less than an hour later. Legal flagged a data sync issue. Vendor management couldn't log into the new dashboard. Procurement was stuck in a queue with a chatbot named Savvy answered every question with, "I'm still learning." Then came the real blow. 5 critical vendors, once tied to Q4 inventory, were frozen in the system. No W-9s, no background checks, no payment routing. One even escalated to their counsel, threatening to pull out if onboarding wasn't resolved by EOD Travis. Of course, was off hosting a transformation Thursday in the break room, drinking cucumber water and sketching flowcharts on butcher paper. By the time he waddled into the war room, finance was on the verge of collective aneurysm. "We've got a minor hiccup," he said, grinning like a man who just re-erranded a semi and called Ida Love Tap. "You migrated compliance without legal review?" I said flatly. "It's plug and play. The sales guy said their AI scales with your needs. The AI doesn't file SEC disclosures. Travis." He blinked as if the term SEC had just been invented on the spot. Maya from Nordell was on the call within the hour. She didn't yell, didn't even frown, just asked who led the software change. Travis opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "Before we go there, I'll send over a breakdown. Timestamps, internal threads, change logs, and access requests." 10 minutes later, emailed the packet. It was clean, objective. Every decision, every file, every forwarded email showing exactly how Travis pushed the switch without a single department head sign off. Then came the twist. Travis tried to spin it. He told Nordell's people that I'd left gaps in the old system and that he was just trying to future-proof operations. He claimed he asked me to lead the change and that I had resisted innovation. What he didn't expect was that I'd also documented that. Screenshots, meeting invites, had declined. Slack threads where he told me, "Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. No need to overthink it." When I sent that second packet, Maya replied with one word: "Received." I didn't hear anything for 48 hours. Then a strange thing happened. I wasn't officially invited to Nordell's internal integration sync, but when the meeting notes circulated, my name was there. Not once, 3 times, not in passing. In agenda bullets, review vendor impact timeline. Carol R. assess system restoration roadmap. KR Toadvise post-M compliance migration. Carol's audit log summary. Travis wasn't mentioned, not once. That's when I realized this wasn't just a cleanup job anymore. He wasn't just a nuisance. He was a liability, a saboteur with a buzzword cannon and no brakes. His mistakes weren't just embarrassing. They were threatening the deal. My deal, our deal. The one I had sacrificed weekends, birthdays, my last damn nerve to get across the finish line. So I stopped trying to work with Travis. I stopped explaining, stopped warning, and I started preparing because fools trip over themselves, but frauds eventually get pushed. And Travis, he was both. The contract had been sitting in my inbox for 2 weeks. I hadn't opened it, not because I was afraid of what was in it, but because I already knew what wasn't. Was labeled Core Sentry Transition Staffing Agreement final draft sent from Nordell's legal team late one night after a flurry of calls. Travis never mentioned it. Probably assumed it was more boring paperwork for legal to hash out. He didn't understand that the most dangerous words in corporate America aren't shouted in boardrooms. They're whispered in footnotes. That morning, after yet another vendor escalated a freeze and Bryce sent out a company-wide email blaming legacy workflow baggage, he sat down with a mug of burnt office coffee and finally clicked it open. 73 pages of legalese, charts, compliance checklists, signature fields, all the usual stuff. I skimmed through page after page, mentally checking off boilerplate until I hit it. Page 14, paragraph 3E, I felt it before I read it. All staffing decisions related to transition phase. Operational personnel must receive final approval from the designated continuity lead whose sole authority may not be overridden by temporary or interim executives not ratified by the board. One more line continuity lead Carol R. Ellis. I stared at my nameplate text. No bold, no italics. Just sitting there buried like a dormant fuse waiting for a spark. Not recommended for, not suggested liaison, not provisional stakeholder authority. I read it again, then once more, slower this time, letting the implications crystallize in my head like black coffee turning to molasses. They'd buried a landmine inside the contract. Travis had signed it. He had signed it thinking it was just a formality. He'd authorized a document that handed me a bigger sword than anything I could have forged myself. The buyers had done it deliberately, quietly, legally. I hadn't even asked. They'd already decided. That's when the emotional shift happened. Not gloating, not revenge-fueled fire. Just a cold, electric realization. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about control. I wasn't boxed out. I was boxed in. They built the damn box around me and left Travis tap dancing on the lid. I highlighted the clause, hit forward, sent it to my personal account with one subject line just in case. I stood up from my desk, smoothed my blouse, and walked past Travis's office. He was in there laughing at some meme Bryce had sent about old-school management styles, while sucking down a green smoothie that looked like liquefied compost. He didn't look up. I didn't stop walking because I knew something he didn't. He thought he was running the transition. I was the transition. The only thing left now was teaming, watching the light in his eyes flicker when he realized who the real boss had been all along. The morning before the final acquisition meeting, my inbox lit up with a company-wide email from Travis. Subject line: exciting next chapter course entry to Nordtone. Delusional content: a 6-paragraph monologue littered with MBA word salad and half-digested quotes from leadership books he probably never finished. As we close the deal, I want to thank everyone for their resilience, innovation, and commitment to seamless leadership continuity during this transformational journey. I stared at the word continuity. The irony nearly choked me. He had no idea what was coming. No idea that the person guaranteeing that seamless continuity was the same woman he tried to erase from every calendar invite for the last 8 weeks. No idea that the clause he signed in blind faith was about to eat his entire career like a vending machine sandwich left in the sun. I sipped my coffee, reread the email, and forwarded it to my personal folder. Epitaphs. That's when the message popped up short, quiet from a name that didn't usually appear in my chat window. Buyer CEO, bring your card tomorrow. That was it. No emoji, no context, just a sentence that hit with the weight of a gavel. I stared at it, heart suddenly louder than the office air vents, and typed the only reply that made sense. Me understood. It was surreal, sitting at my desk like nothing was happening. My coworkers buzzed around like caffeinated bees, decorating the war room with banners for the final integration kickoff. Someone actually printed t-shirts that said CSX Nordell, one team, one dream. Bryce was trying to start a chant in the hallway. I kept my headphones in and my mouth shut, but inside I was sharpening knives. I opened my calendar and scanned the invite for the next day. It had been updated. Title changed from Leadership Transition Review to Post-Close Executive Realignment. That kind of corporate language doesn't mean much to most, but I've worked too many mergers not to hear the subtext. Someone's getting reassigned. Someone's getting realigned right out the door. And then came the cherry on top. Char sent me a draft of my transition thank you letter. I'd seen these before. Usually they were bland, polite, copy-paste statements about valued contributions, but this one was different. Oddly warm. Carol's leadership has been instrumental in preserving operational integrity during this critical season of change. Her forward-thinking processes and command of complex logistics have positioned CoreCentry for long-term success. Then we look forward to her continued impact in the next chapter. I read that last line 3 times. We look forward to her continued impact. HR doesn't write that by accident, not without a directive from higher up. Travis must have skimmed it. Probably just signed off and assumed it was part of the farewell parade. Or maybe he thought continued impact was code for she'll train her replacement and leave with a cupcake. I didn't correct him. Let him walk right into it. Let him carry that smirk into a meeting full of lawyers, board reps, and executives who had already written his name in invisible ink. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the table would be set. The contract would be opened. The card would be handed over. And Travis would realize too late that the woman he dismissed as just ops was the only reason his name ever got printed on those stupid t-shirts in the first place, went home that night and slept like a brick. Travis strutted into the acquisition meeting like a man about to accept an Emmy for Best Imaginary CEO. He adjusted his tie. Too tight, wrong pattern, and winked at someone from Nordell like they were old friends. They weren't. The only time they'd interacted outside of email was when Travis tried to add the buyer CEO on LinkedIn and got left unpending. The room was wall-to-wall corporate theater, mahogany conference table, chrome water pictures, legal counsel flanking both sides. Someone had set out CoreCentry branded folders as if professionalism could be manufactured like party favors. The Nordell team sat and practiced stillness, pen clicks, page turns, one exec sipping mineral water with surgeon-like precision. And then there was me. Back corner, no nameplate, no folder, no fanfare. I didn't need one. Ravi stood at the head of the table like he was hosting a game show. Well, we're excited. We're aligned. We're leaner than ever, he said, pacing as if movement equaled meaning. This acquisition marks the next evolution of CoreCentry, a smarter, sharper, more agile future. And I'd like to personally thank everyone who helped us get here, including Carol Ellis, who will be transitioning out over the next 2 weeks. There it was. He said it like he was doing me a favor. I should bow my head and thank him for the ceremonial kick in the teeth. Bryce clapped. HR nodded solemnly. One of the junior counsel tapped something into a notes app. Maya from Nordal raised a single eyebrow. That was all. I didn't respond, didn't flinch. I just reached into my bag and pulled out one item. A business card. Matte black-white ink. Clean font, one name. Carol R. Ellis, interim COO, transition operations. America's Nordal Systems, no drama. No announcement, just a quiet hand across the table to the buyer CEO. He took it, looked down, then the sound, laughter. Sharp, sudden, involuntary, not cruel, delighted. Like someone had just been handed the punchline to a joke they didn't know they were part of until that very second. Travis blinked twice. Something funny? He asked, his voice trying to hold authority but cracking at the edges. The buyer CEO didn't answer, just tilted the card slightly toward the Nordal legal rep on his right, who took it. Read it and smiled. Not a smirk, a knowing grin like, finally, it's time. Then came the next moment. One of the Nordal execs, Alan, opened his binder. Slowly, carefully, he didn't look at anyone. Just flipped directly to a page marked with a single yellow sticky tab. The tab wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. Page 14, paragraph 3, E, the room quieted. Could hear Bryce swallow across the table. Travis tried to regain control, his voice a beat too loud. Think maybe there's been some confusion. Carol doesn't represent Nordal. She's, just here for legacy context. Maya finally spoke. Calm, crisp. She represents the transition leadership for Core Sentry's operational integration. That was agreed upon legally with your signature, Mr. Harrison. Travis went pale. No, that's not. There's no way that's binding. The buyer CEO slid the contract toward him. Page 14, he said, tapping the tab. Carol Ellis, continuity lead, final staffing authority for all post-acquisition personnel decisions related to operations, logistics, and vendor compliance. Travis didn't sit down. He simply stopped moving, stopped blinking because the meeting hadn't imploded. It had always been a detonation, waiting for a spark. And my business card was the fuse. The buyer CEO cleared his throat with the kind of calm that only comes when you already know how the movie ends, and you're just savoring the final act. He read it slow, deliberate, each word landing like a gavel strike. All transition staffing final approvals fall to the continuity lead, designated as Carol R. Ellis. For this clause, any unilateral changes by non-board approved executives are nullified. The room went still. Ravice's mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish learning how to breathe on dry land. He looked at the page, then at the CEO, then at me, as if I'd materialized out of thin air to steal his crown. His hands hovered above the table, like they were trying to grab onto something that wasn't there. Bryce whispered something into his phone and quickly excused himself. HR suddenly became very invested in the pattern of the conference table wood grain. Eagle didn't even blink. They'd seen this coming. Hell, they probably helped engineer it. Travis tried again. There must be. Look, this was never discussed. I didn't authorize that. She's not. She can't be. The buyer CEO held up a single finger. Your signature's on the agreement, Mr. Harrison. Page 17. He turned the document, tapped the line beneath the clause, and let Travis read it with his own eyes. There it was, his name in ink, right below the sentence that handed me every last ounce of operational authority for the next 90 days. I didn't. She was never supposed to. The CEO didn't raise his voice, didn't smirk. He just leaned back in his chair like a man rearranging chess pieces mid-match. So about your 2 weeks, Travis, he said smoothly. We're reallocating you to facility ops in Kansas City. They could use some help with forklift scheduling. Shift B nights air drop 10 to green. Travis didn't sit down. He didn't storm out. He just stood there as if waiting for someone to tell him it was all a joke. But the only sound was the soft click of Ma's pen as she scribbled something on her legal pad. I didn't say a word, didn't gloat, didn't smile. I simply stood, walked to the end of the table, and accepted the small envelope the HR director passed me. Inside my Nordal badge, Carol R. Ellis Interim COO Transition Operations, Americas. I slipped it into the clip on my lapel. It clicked into place with a soft snap that somehow echoed louder than Travis's entire speech from 10 minutes ago. Thank you all, I said, looking forward to getting started. No one moved. No one objected because it was done. I turned toward the exit, ready to leave the room I'd quietly owned long before anyone realized. And then just behind me, soft and broken, Travis's voice cracked. Wait, she reports to you. The buyer CEO smiled slow and precise. No, he said, she is me for the next 90 days. I didn't turn around. I didn't have to. I walked out of that room and left Travis standing in the ruins of his imaginary empire, drowning in the one thing he never thought he'd have to face. Consequence. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.